Space exploration has always been one of humanity's greatest ambitions. The idea of venturing beyond our own planet, stepping onto new worlds, and expanding the boundaries of human knowledge has captivated us for centuries. But space is an unforgiving place, one where the slightest mistake can lead to disaster. And history has shown us that even the best prepared missions can end in tragedy. One such mission, Apollo 1, was meant to be a stepping stone towards something far greater, landing humans on the moon. It was supposed to be a test flight, a critical first step in the Apollo program's grand vision of sending astronauts to the lunar surface, but it never made it off the ground. Instead, what happened on January 27, 1967, inside a seemingly ordinary spacecraft changed the course of space exploration forever. This is the story of the space mission that never made it back, a story of ambition, disaster, and the hard lessons that would shape the future of NASA. The dream of Apollo. By the mid-1960s, the United States was locked in a race against the Soviet Union for dominance in space. The Soviets had already achieved major milestones, launching the first satellite, Sputnik, in 1957, and sending the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into orbit in 1961. The pressure was immense, and President John F. Kennedy's bold promise to land a man on the moon before the decade was out added even more urgency. NASA's response was the Apollo program. The goal was clear: develop the technology and expertise needed to take humans beyond Earth's orbit and onto the lunar surface. Apollo 1, originally designated AS-204, was to be the first crewed test flight of the Apollo spacecraft. It wasn't supposed to go to the moon just yet, but it was a crucial step in making sure the spacecraft was safe and functional before attempting such a daring mission. The astronauts chosen for Apollo 1 were among the best that NASA had to offer: Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. Gus Grissom was one of NASA's most experienced astronauts, a veteran of the Mercury and Gemini programs. He had already been to space before and was known for his cool-headedness under pressure. Ed White had made history in 1965 as the first American astronaut to perform a spacewalk, an experience that left him exhilarated and eager for more. Roger Chaffee was the rookie of the group, a talented pilot and engineer selected as part of NASA's third astronaut class. Though he had never been to space before, he was determined to prove himself. These three men were ready. They had trained tirelessly, prepared for every scenario imaginable. But there was one scenario that no one saw coming: the fatal countdown. Apollo 1 was scheduled to launch in February 1967. Before that, NASA conducted a series of pre-flight tests, including a plugs-out test, a full systems check with the spacecraft powered up. This test, performed on January 27, 1967, was meant to simulate conditions just before launch. The crew was strapped into their seats inside the command module, going through their final checklist. Everything seemed routine until it wasn't. At 6:31 p.m., disaster struck. A spark ignited inside the cabin. Within seconds, the pure oxygen atmosphere inside the spacecraft turned into an inferno. Flames erupted, consuming everything in sight. The astronauts had no way to escape. The inward opening hatch, designed to withstand the pressure of space, was impossible to open in time. Gus Grissom's final words, recorded in a frantic radio transmission, were haunting: "We've got a fire in the cockpit." Less than 20 seconds after the fire began, it was over. The heat and smoke had taken their toll. The crew of Apollo 1 was lost. The aftermath, NASA's darkest day. The fire shocked the world. How could something like this happen? These astronauts weren't just test pilots, they were national heroes, men who had dedicated their lives to the dream of space exploration. Now, that dream seemed shattered. NASA immediately launched an investigation, and what they found was deeply troubling. The Apollo spacecraft was riddled with design flaws. Flammable materials. The cabin was lined with Velcro, nylon, and other materials that burned rapidly in a pure oxygen environment. Faulty wiring. A spark from exposed wiring was likely the ignition source. A flawed hatch design. The spacecraft's inward opening hatch was impossible to open quickly in an emergency. It was a harsh reality check. The Apollo program had been moving too fast, cutting corners to meet the moon landing deadline. The pressure to beat the Soviets had led to an oversight of critical safety measures. The loss of Grissom, White, and Chaffee forced NASA to take a hard look at its approach. The entire Apollo spacecraft was redesigned from the ground up. Flammable materials were removed, wiring was improved, and most importantly, the hatch was redesigned to open outward, allowing astronauts to escape in an emergency. NASA also adopted a new mindset. Safety had to come first, no matter the cost. A legacy of lessons learned. The Apollo 1 disaster was a turning point. It was a tragedy, but it was not the end. NASA learned from its mistakes, and the changes made in the wake of the accident paved the way for future successes. Just 2.5 years later, on July 20, 1969, Apollo 11 landed on the moon. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepped onto the lunar surface, fulfilling Kennedy's promise and proving that the sacrifices made were not in vain. But Apollo 1 was not forgotten. The lessons learned from that mission saved lives. When Apollo 13 suffered a catastrophic explosion in 1970, it was the redesigned safety systems implemented after Apollo 1 that helped bring the crew home alive. Every astronaut who has flown since has done so in a spacecraft made safer by the sacrifices of Grissom, White, and Chaffee. NASA continues to honor their memory. In 2003, when the Space Shuttle Columbia was lost during re-entry, killing all 7 astronauts aboard, the echoes of Apollo 1 were felt once again. Every space disaster serves as a reminder that exploration comes with risks, but also with responsibility. Today, as humanity looks toward Mars and beyond, the story of Apollo 1 remains a cautionary tale. The names of Grissom, White, and Chaffee are etched in history, not just as astronauts who were lost, but as pioneers who helped make future missions safer. Their legacy lives on in every spaceflight, in every mission that follows strict safety protocols, and in every astronaut who straps into a spacecraft, ready to explore the unknown. Final thoughts. Apollo 1 never made it to space, never made it back, but its impact on space exploration is undeniable. This was the mission that never left the ground, the mission that never made it back. But in its tragedy, it became a beacon, a reminder that every step forward in space exploration must be taken with caution, care, and the knowledge that we owe it to those who came before us to do better. Because space is not forgiving. It is not merciful. But if we learn from the past, we can make sure that the sacrifices of those who came before us were not in vain. And one day, when we step onto Mars or beyond, we will do so standing on the foundation built by the courage, the ambition, and the sacrifice of those who gave their lives in pursuit of the stars.